One Piece, with all its moving parts and fleshed out world, is a series largely defined by its villains. They all provide a direct contrast to the good qualities of Luffy in one way or another, and shine a light on what is wrong and rotten with the world. They represent some philosophical standpoint on being a king, a marine, or a pirate, which Luffy will challenge and demonstrate why his way is better. To see evil people take their philosophies to such extremes only to be completely refuted by Luffy's simple but powerful worldview is satisfying enough to where we can experience the same thing 13 times and still happily sign up for the next arc. Each villain tests a different aspect of Luffy's worldview, and you can't have a proper discussion about the villains of this story without talking about Akainu, because Akainu represents everything that's wrong with the Marines. He is a weapon of war with a strict sense of justice, hell-bent on eliminating anyone deemed an enemy, much like the Marines are as a whole. They are both cruel, unforgiving, and violent. Who is considered an enemy changes all the time, and that will usually include innocent people because the Marines are no stranger to corruption. In fact, Sakazuki and the Marines by extension are most often used to do the dirty work of the Celestial Dragons and are unknowingly complicit in an ancient conspiracy. How fitting that he was codenamed Akainu. He's a mad dog on a leash, loyal to his abusive owners, and aggressive towards everyone else. Akainu has spent most of his panel time post-time skip sitting in his office muttering angrily to himself, and it's because of this that it's not uncommon to see people talk him down as a character. But the way I see it, this is exactly how it should be. On the surface, this is a guy stuck in an office, but beneath the surface, I think there is a volcano. A man made of boiling magma and burning fury, buried under a mountain of paperwork, slowly becoming fed up with the tightening of his reins, steadily becoming angrier, and looking for an excuse to explode. And ever since he fought Aokiji for the nomination and took the position of Fleet Admiral for himself, I always wondered if he had some ulterior motive or vision for the Marines, if there was more behind his decision to spare Kuzan. The Marines are pretty much the only force preventing chaos from reaching the streets of Marijoa, and Akainu runs the whole thing. He made absolutely sure to. He's essentially the only man holding the floodgates shut, and he's indifferent to the world nobles at best, seeing them as only getting in the way of Marine affairs. So what happens when he's had enough of being a puppet, mindlessly following orders and assignments? What happens to the master when the dog bites off his leash? What happens when Akainu decides he doesn't need a boss anymore? Welcome to the Hidden Island, and buckle up guys, because I got another analysis theory combo just for you. In fact, if any of you out there happen to be Mera users, now would be the time to check under your beds and behind your shower curtains, since today we're going to talk about none other than Fleet Admiral Sakazuki, the deadliest man in One Piece. Now, before we get to all the fun and interesting stuff, first we gotta talk about who exactly this man is. Sakazuki, formerly codenamed Akainu, is a stupid fucking asshole fucking dickbag fucking fuckface, was one of the 3 admirals of the Marines and is arguably the strongest of the 3, making him one of the best fighters currently in the organization, if not flat out the best. And now he's currently the Fleet Admiral, meaning that he's not only the strongest active Marine, but also the most politically powerful. He's like if Garp and Sengoku's roles in the organization were combined after their retirement. Garp pretty much used to be the strongest Marine, and his man Sengoku was the one with all the political pull. Now Akainu basically fills both niches, and this has granted him immense sway over how the modern-day Marines operate. But if that's all there was to it, we wouldn't be wasting our time talking about the guy. What makes Sakazuki so important is his characterization and his lasting impact on the characters surrounding him. See, Akainu is not just any Marine. He's the Marine that broke Luffy. He's made enemies of many people in his own ranks, including the hero of the Marines himself. He has a brand of justice unlike all the others, and it can be inferred that this type of justice is by far the most dangerous ideology for a Marine to operate on. All the major named Marines have their own moral codes, and a majority of them either boil down to doing the right thing, independent of what the law says, following the law to a T, or enforcing it simply to uphold order. Some are dissatisfied with the structure of the Marines and wish to leave. Some attempt to be a positive force from the right side of the law, and then you have Akainu, who doesn't subscribe to any of this. But that doesn't mean you don't have to. Huh? See what I did there? Subscribe. Anyway, unlike all the others, Akainu is by far the most extreme. He has his own personal beliefs about the objective of the Marines and has a very strict way of enforcing those beliefs on others. He seems to think, to some degree, that justice is set in stone, and he believes that the law is not open to interpretation. In his mind, the law is the law. Marines are good and pirates are bad. No exceptions. To him, the Marines are the only force in the world fighting for order and justice, and anyone who gets in the way of this objective or causes them to lose face is an enemy of justice and therefore an enemy of the Marines. Additionally, Akainu takes absolutely no prisoners. To him, they're not worth the risk of letting them to live to cause harm another day. A majority of the time, he opts to simply execute anyone he deems an enemy, the two exceptions to this being Bonnie and Kuzan, but we'll talk about them in a bit. This all coalesces to form Akainu's personal brand of justice, thorough justice, and let me tell you, his justice is quite thorough. Whether you be friend, ally, rival, or enemy, superior or inferior, whether you are guilty beyond a reasonable doubt or guilty simply by association, you are subject to the same fiery judgment of the law. All threats and all forms of evil must be eliminated down to their roots. All enemies of justice, regardless of what they look like, man, woman, or child, marine, pirate, or civilian, must be destroyed. All potential associates must be destroyed. All who attempt to stop this process must be destroyed. Akainu is the type to find one bad apple and burn down the whole tree. And that's what makes him terrifying. What this all boils down to is a Marine who doesn't cut any slack to our goody two-shoes protagonists. Luffy and the Straw Hats clearly do not fit the bill of dangerous killer pirates, but Akainu wants to destroy them all the same. If anything, he views them as a bigger threat than the others do because of Luffy's connections, blood relations, and growing infamy, whereas nearly all the other Marines who have met Luffy left those interactions questioning their ways. Some of them even ended up admiring Luffy. Others straight up had a chance to capture him but gave him a pass. While Luffy isn't the kind of guy to talk no jutsu his opponents, admittedly he is very charismatic and likable, credited to the fact that he's not actually an evil piece of shit like the government portrays him. He's a happy-go-lucky kid who protects and helps people. Most reasonable Marines are able to pick up on this, which forces them to question what the title of pirate actually means or whether or not the Marines truly represent justice. Once again, Akainu does not continue this trend. He views Luffy as he does any other pirate, and no matter how much Luffy's will has had an influence on others, it seems like Akainu's will is comparatively as strong. He can't be won over because his beliefs are almost a fact as far as he's concerned. He is thoroughly convinced that pirates and all forms of evil must be stopped, and he's going to be the one to put an end to them. To tell him otherwise would be like telling Luffy he can't be Pirate King. It just doesn't compute. And that's why I really like his characterization, because the Marines are typically so chock full of layered, reasonable human beings who can be swayed by the actions of our hero. Hell, the hero of the Marines was Luffy's very own grandfather. Even in the military force that's supposed to be chasing Luffy, he has allies and family and people who won't truly stand in his way when push comes to shove. Akainu is Oda's answer to this. He's never going to see things Luffy's way. He's never going to support pirates. He's never going to give Luffy a pass. If he has the chance, you can bet your bottom dollar Akainu will try to kill him and all his friends with no hesitation. He is so far gone that even subversive tactics aren't beneath his repertoire. As we saw with Squad, he's willing to lie, cheat, and take the low road in order to destroy his enemies. He won't just try to beat you, he'll try to turn your own friends against you. He is practically a force of nature whose singular purpose is the destruction of everything Luffy has built up and holds dear, and this is emphasized by his Devil Fruit's power, Magma, a literal force of nature and one of the most destructive powers in the entire series. Hell, in real life too, I dare you to find anything that survives getting thrown into lava. Brutality is a part of his design. When you are made of magma, there is no such thing as fighting gracefully and pulling your punches. There are no soft attacks. Every blow, every punch, every shot is a kill shot. Every mistake on his opponent's part is potentially fatal. This is made clear as day by Oda when you pay attention to Akainu's track record. He is without a doubt the most violent character in the story, with the only exception being Shanks. Pretty much any major character who has had a close combat encounter with Akainu has been either killed or scarred for life, and even our main character isn't immune to this. Luffy's signature scar on his chest is a nice little gift from Akainu staring us in the face on every page, a constant, glaring reminder of the irreversible damage he did to Luffy and his family. When he fought Aokiji, he won, and Kuzan was forced to walk away from the fight minus a leg and covered in burn scars. During Marineford, we straight up witness Akainu melting one of his own subordinates for trying to flee the battle and return to his family. He goes on to punch not one, but two entire massive donut holes into Whitebeard's chest, and if that weren't enough, blows off half the man's face. He's also the guy who single-handedly destroyed the Moby Dick, Whitebeard's flagship, and considering it got a send-off just like the Going Merry, I wouldn't be surprised if Newgate's ship had a soul of its own, and in my book, I count that as a murder. He later brutally punches Ace through the torso, also murdering him in front of his brother, and then on the retreat, punches through Jinbei's shoulder in an attempt to put a hole in Luffy, and despite having a Warlord body shield, Luffy was still left with this massive, permanent scar. If it weren't for Shanks, Akainu would have 1000% obliterated Kobe dead, and now in a recent chapter we have him, once again, blowing half a character's entire face off. Between all this and the fact that he's solely responsible for the death of all the Ohara refugees, I'm almost sure, correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm almost sure that Akainu has the highest on-screen kill count out of any character in the story. I guess apart from the walking Death Star up in Marijoa, but they're still a silhouette, so I'm not counting them yet. And Kaido, buddy, sorry. If it was attempted kills, that would be a different story, but you're too much of a bitch to finish the job. Sorry, man. Even Kanjuro has you beat in that department, so yeah. At the very least, Akainu is top 2 on his KD ratio. Fun fact, in a 2012 interview with Yasutaka Nakata in Sound and Recording magazine, Oda once jokingly said that you have to be careful about making your protagonist too strong, because, for example, if Akainu was the main character, One Piece wouldn't last a year. If all this weren't enough to make Akainu out to be a dangerous, ruthless motherfucker, combine this with the fact that Oda has never made him the butt of any jokes or gags. The only other villains who really fit this bill are the Gorosei and Imu, but every other bad guy in typical Oda fashion will not be 100% edgy and evil all the time. No matter how serious things get, a joke will always be inserted to counterbalance the intimidating and dark nature of One Piece's antagonists. Almost all of them have some kind of humorous element. Crocodile got juked by Mr. Prince and has some embarrassing secret he doesn't want people to know. Blackbeard is introduced arguing with Luffy over pie. Enel made the epic meme face. Lucci is a pigeon ventriloquist. Gecko Moria looks like this. Magellan always acts like he's had Chipotle for dinner last night, and his nickname at Impel Down is Shitman. Gastino here is literally a clown. Doflamingo walks to work like this, and his family is made up of freaks that wear diapers, and his strongest enforcer talks exclusively in the 7th octave. Katakuri is a donut fetishist, and Kaido is an emotional, flirty drunk. So tell me, where's the joke with Akainu? That's the thing. There isn't one. There is no fucking joke. This dude wants you dead, and there's nothing to laugh about. He's mean-mugging everyone on every single page he's in and spends half his time angrily burning through cigars in his office like your friendly neighborhood pit bull just waiting to be let off the leash. Oh, look at the cute baby. He's harmless, I swear. Go on. Pet him. So yeah, lately he's been kinda inactive, but that's the point. He's the final boss of the Marines, essentially. He came out only at the very end of pre-time skip because it's impossible to have Akainu do anything without greatly shifting the playing field. This is the kind of guy who smack talks the Gorosei to their face, okay? This is not an early game player. This dude gets a bye for the first 8 rounds of bracket. In just a few attacks, he wiped out a Yonko's ship, its captain, and its future successor. But the war ended, and now a character as destructive and violent as he is needs to take a back seat and cool off. A weapon of war is only necessary when there's a war. But he's not done. I likened him earlier to a volcano. For a while, they're dormant, inactive, but they always carry this air of impending danger, like at any moment, that volcano could go active and burn down everything around it. Akainu's sitting in that office all day, brewing, getting angrier and angrier, waiting for the chance to get back out there and fight. His duties are currently keeping him from the front line, and his will to destroy pirates is clashing directly with the decisions of his superiors. But eventually, when enough pressure builds up, volcanoes erupt. He's a scary, almost unpredictable guy, and it makes me feel incredibly worried for the well-being of other characters whenever they're placed in the same room as him. There's no telling what'll set him off, and there's no telling if his opponents will make it out of that encounter the way they came in. Now that Akainu has left his office and is on the offensive against Kuma, no one is safe. And while he's on the chase, I think we are going to see a return to form for our Admiral, as well as a new side to his character arc that we didn't fully understand back in Marineford. I think the biggest mystery or issue with figuring Akainu out currently is deciding where he slots into the final saga, and by extension where his character arc is supposed to end. He's clearly built up to be one of the final villains in the story, but there's a problem with this. There are two other major contenders for this role. Blackbeard is a perfect foil to Luffy's character and has aspirations as grand as his. He's the only one truly competing with him for the central objective in the story. He's responsible for orchestrating the end of the Great Pirate Era. He's a D, he's evil as shit, and is the reason Ace was captured at all, making him a major target of Luffy's vengeance. Imu is the secret king of the entire world, the central antagonist of the Void Century, the reason the poneglyphs had to be made, probably the reason the One Piece is a thing, and definitely the reason the world is fucked right now. They're the main enemy of basically everyone in existence, the primary target of Luffy's father and all the revolutionaries. They murdered Cobra, likely want Luffy dead more than anyone else on the planet, and if I didn't spell it out already, are evil as shit. Oh, and they're also a giant fucking Bendy and the Ink Machine primordial shadow demon, or something. I guess when I put it that way, maybe Imu does feel like a more sensible final villain, but hold on, we're not done yet. Behind door number 3, we have Akainu, who likes bonsai trees, making collages out of burnt up bounty poster scraps, and ladies, if that's not enough, according to the author, his dick is made of lava. This guy not only heads the entire military arm of the world government hell-bent on capturing, torturing, and killing pirates, but he is a genocidal maniac who helped wipe out the entire home country of a major protagonist. Plus, of the 3 villains in question, Sakazuki is by far the most combat-focused. He's tried to kill not only Luffy, but also Kobe, the first 2 people we start our adventure with, and could only be stopped by the very man who set Luffy off on his journey. But without a doubt, the biggest reason Akainu feels like a contender is that he is the man who killed Ace. He is the only character in One Piece who truly broke Luffy, and robbed him of his sworn brother and closest friend. To add insult to injury, he left Luffy with his famous X-mark scar, and this scar has now become an essential part of Luffy's character design for the greater part of the story. So who's it gonna be? I'm sorry to say that despite all the hyping up I just did, I personally don't think Akainu is gonna be the endgame boss, leading me to my theory that he's going to break off from the world government before we ever get to that point. The big reason for this, and what I think separates him from the other 2 quite definitively, is his character motivation. A central theme in the story is what makes a good king, and questioning the nature of leadership in general. Luffy's primary objective is to become the Pirate King. There are kings or rulers of some kind present in nearly every arc, and the entire world is ruled by a single person. Blackbeard clearly has aspirations to be a king of some kind, and if he's anything like Rocks, he probably wants to be king of the world. His goal is likely to dominate everyone else in the story. Likewise, Imu has already dominated the entire world. While Blackbeard's goal is to gain ultimate power, Imu's goal is to maintain ultimate power. And both their goals are in direct conflict with Luffy's goal to become Pirate King, the freest man on the seas, therefore free from their control. Blackbeard, Imu, and Luffy's motivations are all very intimately tied together, and their purpose is lost without each other's presence. If Blackbeard or Luffy didn't exist, Imu wouldn't have to worry about maintaining power. If Imu didn't exist, there may not even be pirates, Luffy would have nothing to be free from, and Blackbeard would have no one to conquer, so on and so forth. Blackbeard wants to restart the cycle, Luffy wants to break the cycle, and Imu wants to maintain the current one. I have no doubt in my mind that this is the final major conflict of the story that Oda is building up to, and Akainu doesn't really fit into this anywhere. See, Akainu's objective as we currently understand it is to destroy evil down to its roots. He doesn't seem to want to rule over people. In fact, he currently despises his leadership position because it prevents him from going out to the battlefield and getting things done. It feels to me like he took up the position of Fleet Admiral in part because the Gorosei told him to, and partly because he didn't trust the original nominee with the responsibility. After all, Aokiji is lazy justice, the complete opposite of thorough justice, and they've never liked each other ever since Ohara? Why would he want to answer to him? To a guy like Akainu, he'd rather take a leadership role he doesn't want instead of putting it in the hands of a man he doesn't respect. And in the end, his bosses were putting him up to the position, so who is he to question that, right? Which begs the question, if and when he's presented with the reality of the world government, that he's been lied to about the very institution that he's been protecting, and that he's actually just been a puppet in a massive 800-year-old cover-up, what will he do? In my opinion, he'll do what he always does, eliminate his enemies. I think there are a few scenarios that could play out here. For one thing, people are ready for Luffy or Dragon to start the final war, but there's also a third possibility that the conflict starts from the inside, with some sort of insurrection led by Akainu, Marines going their own way, if you will. And it's this challenge to their authority that leads the world government to jump to the extreme and start the Great Cleansing, since they no longer have a military to fall back on. We can see that his leadership role is being strained with recent events, forcing him to leave his office and do damage control himself, a job that would normally fall to someone else. He's been shown to argue with the Gorosei, as we mentioned, and celestial dragons treat him with disrespect. Now that the battlefront is moving into the Holy Land, the camel's back is only a few grains of straw away from breaking. It may be that the Gorosei themselves get tired of having Sakazuki in charge, and attempt to relieve him of his position, which he would most likely refuse, and once again, this would spark massive conflict within the ranks of the government. If it doesn't start from the inside, and Akainu is still at first on the side of the government going into the final war, the only reason for this I can imagine is so that Luffy and Sabo get their grudge match in. Maybe they recreate the moment of Luffy and Ace in the fire, but with Sabo instead, and together they kick the ever-loving shit out of Akainu and avenge the brother they previously couldn't defend. Maybe Sabo has a moment where his fire actually conquers Akainu's magma, maybe because it's dragon fire or something, and Sakazuki goes out for the count, at least temporarily. And upon returning like he always does, Akainu would be confronted with the truth of what he's been protecting this whole time, that he's been Imu's pawn, leading him to disavow his former masters. In the smaller chance that my mega theory turns out to be right and the world nobles are all descendants of pirates from the Void Century, this would give some added motivation for his character shift, since Big Boy would realize that he's been protecting and taking orders from pirates this entire time, the same people who likely ruined his childhood. More on that later. In this situation, it's possible he decides to go to war with them. After all, they're evil, dirty pirates just like all the others, and so are all the world nobles who he's been fetching lobster for. Akainu is the kind of guy who, with this knowledge, would go on a rampage in Marijoa and needs to be stopped by Luffy or the Revs, who, despite their hatred for the world nobles, protect them from his brutality. Because, as we have seen with Miosgard, and as Bakainu universally refuses to accept, not all of them are terrible people. And it's here that he's defeated and his story comes to a close, once again, before the finale of the story. Where does Blackbeard fit in? I'll save that for another video, but if I had to guess, he swoops in after the battle is all said and done. They all just did the heavy lifting for him after all, just like in Marineford, and maybe he's even the one who murks Imu in the end. Whitebeard stood in front of his throne, so Blackbeard killed him and took his territory. Imu is just that on a much larger scale. There's also the possibility that all of this is wrong, and he's been their chore boy ever since he got into a position of power, but I don't know. He seems to have too much of a mind of his own to be a puppet forever. He clearly has his own, very different vision for the Marines. He challenged the prior fleet admiral's nomination. He argues with the Gorosei. He seems to not care at all for what the world nobles think of him, a stark contrast to someone like Kizaru, for example. I don't think we'd catch Sakazuki pouring them any tea. Somehow, Bonnie escaped alive from the guy, but we've never actually seen the escape, making it possible that he let her live. And why would he let her live after acknowledging how worried the world government has been over her? Well, it could be because her being alive and keeping the Gorosei awake at night is more useful to him. Regardless of how it actually plays out, it's all just hypothetical. But I do think Akainu is set up to be the first of the big three baddies to go down in the final saga, and if for whatever reason Blackbeard's story ends before that, which I would riot over, then Akainu will most definitely be the penultimate villain of the story, but not the final one, that's for sure. Matter of fact, the running themes in these predictions I have are the same, and at the very least, I'm thoroughly convinced on a few major plot points that will happen, no matter how the rest of it goes. I'm certain that Sakazuki will get betrayed in some major way by the people he's working for, he'll realize he's been a pawn in their schemes, and he'll ultimately turn against them. He clearly seems to have some growing frustrations with his job, and it's possible this comment from a recent chapter is actually a projection of his own worries, being used as a puppet by his bosses. Throughout the story, it's made to seem as though he's the world government's golden boy. He finished the job on the world government's behalf back at Ohara when someone like Aokiji couldn't. He was the one who successfully executed Ace, which was the government's government's entire intention leading up to the Marineford War. He was given the Elders' personal backing for the Fleet Admiral position over the nomination put forward by the incumbent leader. And while he's been in power, he's constantly told by his superiors to stay in his place and even to disregard his honor. In this specific example, he openly calls Cypherpole the Celestial Dragon's puppet, without realizing that he's just as much of a puppet as they are. And we see this theme return in his most recent appearance, where he's once again projecting onto Kuma while a crowd of nobles ironically bark orders at him. Sakazuki has been blindly, or at the very least adamantly, upholding the values of his puppeteers without fully realizing that he's become as much of an agent to their will as a literal mindless robot. He spoke of Whitebeard as a loser who died for people that ultimately betrayed him and never achieved his dream. We know that's not true, but to Akainu it may very well reflect what he considers to be and not to be a successful life. In his eyes, dying to protect someone who could easily betray you and not achieving your dreams in the process is considered by him to be a failed life. So my theory here centers around the idea of putting Akainu in that very same position and figuring out how he would respond. It would also be neglectful not to mention the potential connection he has to Monkey D. Dragon's past. He's one of the first characters to identify Luffy as Dragon's son before Sengoku made it public knowledge. He almost exclusively refers to him as Son of Dragon and regards Luffy as a prime target because of his blood lineage. The manga has recently given us a deeper look into each of the three admirals by pitting them up against certain important characters. Aokiji is head-to-head with Garp, and Kizaru is now fighting Luffy, 2 out of 3 members of the Monkey family. And while Akainu is not currently fighting Dragon, he is currently fighting and hunting Kuma, a close friend of Dragon's, and he's directly dealing with the after effects of Dragon's army attacking Marijoa. Not to mention the whole Bonnie thing, tying him heavily into Kuma's plotline and, by extension, the revolutionaries. If I had to guess what the overall connection is, it's that Dragon used to be a Marine himself, maybe a contemporary or comrade of Sakazuki's. Maybe Dragon is the one that got away. Garp without a doubt would have brought up his own son as a Marine just like he did with Luffy, and Dragon, having run multiple paramilitary organizations later in life, demonstrates proper military strategy indicative of some prior experience. Dragon was 24 when he started the Freedom Fighters, and even older when Ohara burned down, and he started the Revolutionary Army. But we know nothing about his life before that. If I had to take a wild guess, him being a disgruntled Marine is the likely answer. And if Akainu experienced the betrayal of a comrade early in his career, and if that comrade then went on to become the most wanted man in the world, it would probably fuck up his worldview forever, giving him that take no prisoners attitude and leading him to be unforgiving towards traitors. Also helpful to consider that in the Eastern Zodiac, which we know Oda has pulled from, the dog and the dragon are opposite signs. And now in One Piece, Dragon and Akainu both sit at the top of their respective opposing militaries, taking potshots at each other. Does this connection to a man who may have left the Marines and turned against the world government imply that Akainu has a comparable inner crisis? You may be thinking, this sounds like a whole lot of headcanon, and sure it is, but I'm not just taking shots in the dark here. There are numerous hints throughout Akainu's character design, dialogue, and inspirations that point towards a certain type of character arc. Oda seems to have been rather deliberate in what the admirals looked and behaved like, and this has affected the trajectory of their character arcs so far. So now is the fun time of the video that we all love, where we get to dive into
character inspirations and influences.
Now, as we go through this, try to keep those themes we've been discussing in mind. Ready? We hopefully all know that the original 3 Admiral codenames are taken from the story of Momotaro. In the story, a child was given to a childless couple as a gift from the gods, born from a giant peach, who then grows up and goes on a quest to Onigashima, the island of devils, to slay them and save his island. Along the way, he makes friends with a dog, a monkey, and a pheasant, who join him on his quest, and while they initially can't get along, Momotaro teaches them that unification is strength, and they become good old friends. In the end, their teamwork is the reason that their raid is successful. They capture the king of Oni, take all his treasure back home, and are forever immortalized as heroes. It's one of the oldest power of friendship stories there is. Now, Oda has obviously referenced this directly with Momonosuke, Kaido, and the raid on Onigashima, but it doesn't stop there, as we know. Aokiji means blue pheasant, Kizaru means yellow monkey, and Akainu means red dog. Even Fujitora and Ryokugyu, meaning purple tiger and green bull respectively, are the 2 animals in the zodiac which, when symbolically combined, become the Oni due to their bull horns and tiger pelts. These 2 animals are located on the northeast corner of the zodiac, and Onigashima Onigashima in the story is located to the northeast of the island, thus the association. But why is this theming used with regard to the Marines? Well, some historical context is necessary here. The story of Momotaro is not only a popular folktale in Japan, but it was widely known in recent history for its usage as nationalistic wartime propaganda. It's almost become a symbol for big government calling you to arms. The American equivalent would be the "I want you, Uncle Sam" poster. This story is one that can be construed to represent Japan as a whole, formerly warring states and clans that would come together as a unified fighting force used to repel and invade their enemies, just like the world government claims to be. It presents a message that can be construed to favor group mentality and subservience to someone with divine right above all else, just like in One Piece, which is especially important when considering that the emperors of Japan were seen as demigods up until the end of World War II. So, in the Sino-Japanese War, the Russo-Japanese War, and especially in the big one, World War II, it was incredibly common to see wartime propaganda featuring Momotaro as a Japanese soldier and whichever enemy nation they were facing depicted as Oni. In fact, the first feature-length animated film ever made in Japan was a Momotaro World War II propaganda movie. Yeah, that's right, the first anime movie ever. That's how prominent this connection between Momotaro, government manipulation, war, and imperialism is in the modern day. And that's not to say the whole purpose of the original story is to support these things, but it's gained that association over time due to its misappropriation. Long story short, this is the perfect theming for the world government, which purports that it is a unified, unbreakable alliance of all the world's nations. It's a militaristic organization built on propaganda, founded upon divine right, and their primary goal is the elimination of all its enemies, mostly pirates and revolutionaries whom it labels as demons and devils. In fact, anyone arrested is thrown into a jail themed entirely around the circles of hell, and the entire world is made up of islands full of potential devils, so as far as the government is concerned, any problem island is just another island of Oni to be raided and destroyed. They even captured and publicly executed the king of these devils, Gold Roger, and while they didn't bring treasure back with him, he released his treasure to the world to find anyway. So if we take the original story and recontextualize it so that Momotaro represents the world government and the animals the Marines, each of them being one of the three admirals, then we stand to learn a little bit more about Oda's intentions. For one thing, in One Piece we meet the pheasant first, the monkey second, and the dog third. But in Momotaro it's the opposite order, dog first and pheasant last, further implying a reversal on the narrative and their proximity to their master. Going forward, let's look at how each of the animals are introduced in the folktale. The dog is the only one of the three to attack Momotaro, and only joins his side once Momo shows how strong he is and tells him his mission is to kill the Oni. The monkey approaches Momo next, who had heard of his expedition and submits immediately, happy to serve his new lord, but not without an objection from the dog, because according to the story, dogs and monkeys always hate each other. Finally, the pheasant appears, taking no notice of the others, and the dog immediately tries to kill it, but the pheasant fights back, and the two have an impressive battle. So impressive that Momotaro can't help but sit back and watch, until he decides to break things up. When he does, he threatens the pheasant into joining his group, and weirdly enough, makes him apologize for the scuffle, even though it was the dog who started it. The bird apologizes for his rude behavior, I guess for ignoring them, and offers his aid, following behind the dog and the monkey. Assuming you haven't noticed all the bizarre similarities already, isn't it weird how the dog is the most aggressive, talks back to Momotaro, and instigates an extended fight specifically with the pheasant? Isn't it weird how the monkey is the most laid back of the three and seems quick to be subservient? Isn't it weird how the pheasant humbles himself despite not being in the wrong and only joins the group at the threat of death rather than a desire to help actually kill the Oni? The way they're each introduced is emblematic of their character and is almost directly captured in their admiral counterparts' responses to authority. At first, the dog attacks Momotaro, the monkey welcomes him, and the pheasant ignores him. Akainu fights against his orders all the time. Kizaru always mindlessly follows orders, and Aokiji just straight up ignores them. Their tendencies are baked into their very code names, and Akainu's nature is ardent and rebellious just like the dog, leading me to believe this will be a big contributor to his actions later. But the symbolism and characterization of the three admirals doesn't stop there, because not only are their code names embedded in Japanese culture, but so are their likenesses. Their very faces are adapted from famous real-life Japanese actors, as you probably already know. And I see people bring this up all the time, but not so often do I see people talk about the movies those actors are most well known for. And we should, because that would very greatly influence their portrayal in the story. Most of us know Al Pacino for The Godfather, Donnie Brasco, or Scarface, mob movies. If Oda made a character that was designed to look like Al Pacino, there's a 99% chance that this character would have an aesthetic, demeanor, or story related to mafia or mob-related themes. His character arc might even reference his movies. He wouldn't make him a farmer, a sailor, or a painter or some shit. And by the same token, all the characters in the Marines with real likenesses all come from actors involved or most well known for their roles in, you guessed it, Japanese mob movies, which explains a lot from the world government's frequent use of mob tactics to the fact that the admirals are always so dripped out in expensive suits. Anyways, Aokiji is based on actor Yusaku Matsuda, who is also the inspiration for Spike Spiegel and Kenshiro. And Yusaku Matsuda is arguably most well known for his role in the movie and television series Detective Story, where he plays a hardline detective who rides around on a scooter and just look at him. He spends his time investigating political corruption, solving murders, and uncovering other crimes tied to the Yakuza. In the TV show, his name is Kudo, which at least phonetically isn't far off from Kuzan. I find it interesting that out of all the admirals, Aokiji's actor is the only one known for playing a character who isn't a direct part of the Yakuza, but instead one who investigates them and brings them to justice. And in One Piece, Aokiji is the only one so far who's left his admiral position and the Marines entirely. This would be an even closer comparison if it later turns out that Kuzan has been undercover in the Blackbeard crew this whole time. Kizaru is based on actor Kunie Tanaka, who is well known for his long-running performance in a multi-part Yakuza film series, Battles Without Honor and Humanity, a movie which features not only his actor, but the actor behind Akainu, as well as Kurouma. I don't want to say much more about the plot until we get to discussing Akainu, but in this series, Kunie Tanaka plays a character named Makihara, at first an unassuming, rather goofy member of the Yakuza who blends into the background almost, only to later reveal that he's actually the boss's secret bitch boy, showing a cold, calculating personality beneath the goofy exterior. He's featured quite often wearing white, yellow, or mustard-colored suits, and the actor even sports a Borsalino hat throughout many of his films. Once again, the personality and general characterization present in the movie is almost spot on to Oda's adaptation. Kizaru is an oddball to a funny degree. You'd be forgiven for thinking he's stupid or something after first meeting him, but don't be fooled. He's much colder than he first appears, and if he's been given orders from his boss to deal with you, you'll quickly realize how sharp-minded he is beneath the surface. Something both the real and the fictional Kizaru hold true to. Fujitora and Ryokugyu are an interesting pair because their likenesses are taken directly from movies that don't at first seem to involve Yakuza. Fuji is based on a character named Zatoichi featured in The Tale of Zatoichi, played by actor Shintaro Katsu, a blind swordsman with a cane sword, a gambling addiction, and a humble nature. Because of the era the movie is set in, you'd probably think it's all about samurai and that the samurai are from a time long before the gangbang and Yakuza were a thing, but you'd be wrong. Yakuza did exist back then, and they were viewed as a local police force that would protect villages from bandits and raiders, and the villagers would pay them for protection. Sound familiar? They also ran the local bars, brothels, and gambling houses just like they do today, except back then they had a much stricter code of honor and were viewed more positively because they bolstered the economy and provided safety from invasion. Not to say they were nice guys or anything, they were still thugs and killers, but they were once a stricter part of the community hierarchy. And while Zatoichi was a swordsman, he was not a samurai. He was once again a member of the local Yakuza who grew tired of all the death he caused and chose to spend his life as a wandering swordsman, often helping protect the innocent from the criminals and mobsters who would abuse them. And Oda basically converted this character into One Piece almost one-to-one and slapped a gravity power on his sword, down to Isho's personal code centered all around helping innocents and being a tough but humble protector of the people. A direct contrast to his counterpart, Ryokugyu, who believes in discrimination and elitism. Ryokugyu's actor, Yoshio Harada, is mostly known for the movie Ronin Gai, where he plays a character literally named Aramaki, a disgraced samurai who bands together with a bunch of others to protect a brothel in a red light district. This movie also features two of the other actors we just discussed, Kizaru and Fujitora's, and Yoshio Harada's character is actually very much like One Piece's Aramaki. Loudmouth, edgy, and generally an unlikable guy. Pretty much the exact opposite of someone like Zatoichi and Fujitora. However, the most interesting point in the comparison is that both Fujitora and Ryokugyu's inspirations come from a different, more classical era of Yakuza, and in both examples, they play lone swordsmen who are recruited into a greater cause by the end, just like how both admirals were lone swordsmen who got drafted into the Marines. Whereas the original three admirals are oriented around the way the law should be upheld, Lazily, thoroughly, or unclearly, Fuji and Ryo's brands of justice are centered more around social hierarchy specifically, with one believing that the Marines have a duty to protect the people, and the other believing that they have a duty to oppress them. And their movies at least partly address these core issues in societal structure, because feudal Japan was one of the most rigid societies out there. But let's go back to the present-day mobsters as we finally arrive at Akainu, who owes his appearance to an actor named Bunta Sugawara. And Bunta Sugawara plays the main character, Shozo Hirono, in the film series we mentioned before, Battles Without Honor and Humanity, produced by Toei. Yes, that Toei. If the Momotaro World War II connections weren't enough for you, now's a good time to mention that this film series takes place mostly in Hiroshima, and starts directly after the end of the war. This is important, because a lot of what we know about the modern-day Yakuza was a result of this time period, and people looking for extra legal means of protection or income in a country occupied by a foreign force, run by a government in the midst of restructuring. That's prime time for criminal enterprise, and Hiroshima was a hotspot for this. What makes this even crazier is that in One Piece, Akainu's dialect in Japanese is specifically the Hiroshima dialect. No other character, aside from Hibari, shares this trait with him in the story, so right out the gate we can already see how heavily Oda pulled from these movies, and it's this film series that marked the beginning of an entire new era of Yakuza movies in Japan. Prior to this, mob movies typically portrayed Yakuza as honorable heirs to the samurai code, with noble goals and likable qualities much like we discussed before, but Battles Without Honor and Humanity changed the game completely, because suddenly things got a lot more gritty, and the major characters were not noble men, but treacherous, violent, and selfish thugs or murderers. Suddenly, the cinema portrayal of the Japanese mob became a much darker one, and it all started with Big Man Akainu's movies. But let's talk plot. Hirono is a soldier who has returned home, and is faced with the rapidly changing hometown, devastated by the aftermath of the war and occupied by Americans. His community is poor and run down, they're left with little opportunity, and he spends his time drinking with his war buddies, this guy included, until he's ultimately approached by a small Yakuza branch in the area with a job offer. He's to perform a hit on someone acting out in public, and with little reason to refuse, he goes and shoots the guy. After doing so, Hirono is sent to jail with his friends, only to be bailed out by the Yakuza who hired him, and he and all his buddies are rewarded by being invited into the mob. So it's here that Shozo takes his first step into the criminal underworld. Now that we're discussing initiation, it's a good time to mention that the name Sakazuki is the term for exchanging sake cups in an oath, much like how we've seen done throughout One Piece, actually. However, the practice of Sakazuki in our world is something that is widely associated with the mob, not pirates or anything like that. It's a ceremonial oath that new Yakuza take when they join, typically sharing a cup with their new boss. This exchange of sake is meant to be a binding act, and the implication is that breaking this oath or betraying your sworn brothers is to be met with death. So, to name Akainu after this term is not only symbolic of his Yakuza influences, and not only of how seriously he takes his duty as a Marine, but also captures the entire theme of his character that I'm predicting. The straining of the oath he took as a Marine to serve his superiors. If that weren't enough, he also features a massive sleeve tattoo on his arm and potentially more on his back, as shown in this cover story, and I shouldn't have to explain the obvious Yakuza connection there. Anyway, Hirono is, by all accounts, a good Yakuza. He takes his oath very seriously, is very loyal to his superiors, and has a strict Yakuza code, but because of these qualities is constantly taken advantage of by those around him. He finds himself being pulled around between his various loyalties and becomes wrapped up in the schemes of his boss, whom he repeatedly takes the fall for. On multiple occasions, he's used to enforce the rules of the mob and whack certain members, some of whom used to be his comrades from the war. If that weren't enough, he's also forced to do jail time for it and take the fall for his boss, all while his boss gets rich and lives a good life on the outside. Little by little, all his former friends that he was sworn in with die one by one, with Hirono being one of the last survivors. These various grievances, of course, chip away at his ideal of what a Yakuza is, and over the course of the story, he begins to realize that he's been used as a puppet the entire time, and that his friend, Makihara, the Kizaru guy, has secretly been in on it this whole time as the boss's mole. In light of these revelations, the first film ultimately ends with him renouncing his oath and walking away from the Yakuza life. Now, I only watched the first movie for the sake of writing this video, but there is a whole series beyond this, and from what I read online, Hirono does return to the Yakuza eventually, climbing to the rank of boss, before finally getting so sick of the endless cycle of violence that he leaves it for good. What makes this so compelling to me is that Akainu seems to be struggling with the exact same dilemma. He is very loyal to the Marines and very adamant about their purpose, but he is constantly arguing or working against the choices of his superiors and his subordinates, whether it be Fujitora, Sengoku, or the Gorosei. He has no friends on any side. He seems to be concerned about being a puppet of the system. He has his own vision for the Marines and what they should be, and recently rose to the position of boss. Both characters are military men. They're both loyal enforcers, and they both have a take-no-shit attitude. Both come to resent their bosses, and I'm theorizing that both will come to the same conclusion: break your allegiances and settle things yourself. With all the similarities between these movie characters and their One Piece counterparts, I would be shocked to see Oda suddenly not carry over the two central character traits that Hirono possesses in these films: his crisis of loyalty and his strong personal code, both traits which so far seem to be present in Akainu, but not yet followed through to their logical conclusions. I also couldn't help but notice the similarities in their early circumstances, which led them to joining their respective organizations in the first place. We don't have a flashback yet, but Oda has shown us a young Sakazuki. And this picture, man, it paints 1,000 words. Despite being a child, circumstances have forced him to wield a weapon. He seems incredibly unhappy, and the state of his clothing implies that he's either poor or that his community is suffering at the hands of someone else. Maybe both. He's wearing a tattered hat on his head with the kanji for justice, as typically featured on Marine coats. Since children don't serve in the Marines, he either made it himself or he picked up the hat off somebody else's body. If it's the latter, then that begs an additional question about why there are dead Marines, which would further imply a battle of some kind is taking place there. And considering how Akainu hates pirates more than I hate Yamato, I think it's safe to say that pirates are the reason for this. Another angle to consider is that if he did actually make the hat himself, it could be because there were no Marines present to stop the pirate invasion of his home, and they suffered with no protection. Maybe his home country was unaffiliated with the world government, and thus were not offered any help. Being subject to constant pirate raids without any Marines to protect them may have made Sakazuki despise pirates as a whole and look toward the Marines as a force of good. He may have idealized the concept of Marines to a fanatical degree, made that hat, and took matters into his own hands, doing what he believed a Marine should do: kill pirates. The terrible conditions he grew up in led him to join the corrupt organization that is the world government, and these conditions are very comparable to an early post-war Japan. Very poor, demoralized, occupied by foreigners, and just barely starting to climb out from the rubble. The same condition that created many of the Yakuza we think of today, and the movie Oda pulled from to represent this couldn't be more appropriate. The director of the movie based its grittiness and realistic violence on his childhood experiences working in a munitions factory during the war, where he'd be subject to bombings, came close to death on multiple occasions, and frequently had to help clean up the dead, forever changing his perspective on violence and humanity. It's horrible to imagine, but it's a very real problem that's an inevitable byproduct of human cruelty and selfishness. And when someone is placed into the machine of war, they can't help but come out the other end very different people. I'm certain that Akainu as a character will pull from similar experiences as his justification for why he is the way he is. He was likely molded, if not carved, by a very harsh, brutal environment into the prime candidate for a pirate-hating Marine, and his loyalty and dedication to upholding the world government's laws came from the chaos caused by a complete absence of them in his youth. Akainu is not so much concerned with protecting the celestial dragons as he is maintaining a world free of the chaos brought by pirates. In this way, I think he's being set up by Oda to have a major conflict in loyalty, and just like in the movies, once he realizes he's been used to serve some alternative agenda, there's a big chance in my mind that he's going to make a major move. If he let Aokiji live, and let Bonnie live, then there's no telling what he's going to do when he catches up to Kuma. Will he kill him and follow his orders, or will he play his own game? My chips are on the second option, because knowing how this man operates, knowing who he's based on, and knowing what he represents, tells me that he will turn against his masters, not to help anyone else, but to uphold the integrity of his Marine code, because Sakazuki's justice is truly absolute. Thank you for watching another monster video of mine. I hope most of you stuck around till the end, and if you did, please show me some love in the comments, leave a like, and subscribe. I know it's been a minute since we've been back at the bar, but the good news is we are back, and if you want me to talk more about the Marines, please let me know. I'm a big fan of the Admirals, especially Akainu, so I've been wanting to make a video like this for a while. No joke, this is me and my two friends at Comic-Con, and this is me arriving at the venue just about ready to hand out free aces to everyone. And this is me— Oh. Oops.